So, here to talk about Demoman in New Vegas today. Who would he side with? Now, Demoman is where the class lineup starts getting a lot more straightforward, because the attack classes, Scout, Soldier, and Pyro, they're all very sort of like wacky. I think their reasoning tends to be a lot more in the cuckoo area, whereas from Demoman onwards, things start to get normal, but I think he's the last of the weird ones for a very particular reason. Because Demoman has a duality to him, a lot like Pyro, where Pyro's like mindset is broken up between reality and Pyrovision. Demoman's reality is sort of broken up between, darkly enough, sober and drunk, basically. Because if you're not autistically obsessed with TF2 lore, like I am, and you're maybe more on the Fallout side of the fence, the weirdest thing about Demoman is, from my perception, Demoman in-game in TF2, he is consistently pissed up, essentially. Demoman is always drunk, to my knowledge. In the comics, that tends to be the other way around. Demoman is usually quite sober in the comics. That's usually when he's not having a whole bunch of drinks. So we get a very different view of Demoman when he is, like, off the piss, so to speak. For example, in the War comic, we get this little arc where we see Demoman at home with his mum, and we see he's actually quite the responsible caretaker, making sure she drinks her tea and stuff. When Miss Pauling offers him all those weapons to, like, gay men soldier, you really see him, like, contemplate this. Like, he doesn't just sloppily go into it, he's sort of like, "Aw man, do I really want to gay man my best buddy? I don't think that's very cool." And he actually refuses to remove Soldier's thinking cap in the end, until Miss Pauling tells him that, oh, Soldier accepted the offer. And at that point, it's more of like this realization that he's been betrayed, essentially. But he takes this very seriously. Like, he's very level-headed almost all the time. It's weird, because he becomes the voice of reason in the comic he's in, and it's very peculiar. Like, I know in the main comic arc, he's used as almost the straight man to Soldier's nonsense. And then in the Halloween comics, he's given the kids sage advice, being like, hey children, don't trust wizards. So, you know, usually he's quite the guy that I feel like, if you would like told him, okay, Soldier, you need to make political decisions for this region. I said Soldier, I mean Demoman. I don't know why he's getting whitewashed. Soldier's just giving off that much main character energy that he's just taken over Demoman's video where he's like, ha, take that, I will put my finger up your butt. But anyway, if you asked Demoman to make political decisions, provided there was no alcohol near him, I feel like he'd make very sound decisions. Like, he'd be the sort of politician where, like, he'd consider everything that's going on before making a thing. You know, because Demoman, although he's military, he's mercenary rather, he's not mercenary because he wants to be selfish. He just kind of does it because he feels like he has to, essentially. So I feel like if you gave Demoman an opportunity, sort of like when he loses his job to the robots in the comic arc, he just kind of sits around all day. He's not sort of like, I need to get more jobs. He's just sort of like, I'll just chill out if I can, you know what I mean? Like, he's clearly a bit of a gun nut. Like, he really almost comes his pants when Miss Pauling shows him the island, even though that's a sword, not a gun, but shush. Like, to an extent, I think he's decently materialistic, but not to the point where he probably, like, I'd say he wouldn't murder someone over it, but he is a mercenary, so maybe I'm barking up the wrong tree and making bollocks up, but who knows? Anyway, I don't think he'd be the sort of person who would go too far out of his way for himself. He works for the money. He's not necessarily the sort of person who would selfishly do something, you know what I mean? Like, he's not into corruption. My point is, I think he's very level-headed. I don't think he'd be going anywhere near the Legion, and as tempting as Yes Man would be to most people, I don't think Demoman cares about being a leader. I don't think he'd see enough in it for him to do that. I could see a reason for maybe Demoman going NCR if he wanted to sort of like make the region potentially more safe. But I think, consider what Demoman's like, he does things for work. You know, he probably wants to get the most money he can to probably support his mum, quite frankly. He'd want the most money for the least responsibility, I feel. So I think Demoman is a Mr. House guy. Now, if we're sticking to just sober Demoman here, I like to think of this from the perspective of Demoman is a static character. Like, I like the idea of giving all the mercs character arcs throughout New Vegas that I feel like they'd go on, but I feel like that's an entirely separate discussion than just who would Demoman, the character in Team Fortress 2, pick in New Vegas. I don't necessarily want to be creating fan fiction right now of like what would happen in this world if they were allowed to evolve and develop with the world. Because I think you can make a very solid argument that if Demoman was allowed to sort of flex a little bit, I think you could persuade him to go NCR because you could view it as, oh, this is the best thing for the region, and maybe you could talk him out of being super money-centric, which would be super interesting, but that's a story for another day. Because I think that would be super interesting. Suggest me some arcs below you think the mercs would go on in New Vegas if they were allowed to actually develop as characters, because you guys come up with some whack shit down there. It's actually really interesting. Like, I had this idea for basically an alternate universe where Scout becomes more like Spy in the Fallout universe, because knowing Scout's so sort of like flimsy and basically can get wrecked by anything that even looks at him wrong, I can imagine if he could, you know, learn and use his big brain, he'd actually learn that that, if I'm like sneaky and careful, I'm actually way more effective than just running up and getting shot in the stomach immediately. So I think watching Scout go on that journey will be fascinating, but that's a whole other thing. We'll get back to that later. But anyway, we've got to talk about the second half of this, and that is Demoman and alcohol. I compared it to Pyrovision earlier, and I think it's a very good comparison because much like Pyrovision, the writer can just sort of insert whatever they want Demo to do, regardless of whatever happens. Like, oh, Demo gets drunk and then murders 8,000 people and then makes friends with Caesar and they have a kiss together. And they wake up in bed together and Demo's like, oh, what happened last night? He looks over, sees Caesar in the bed next to him and goes, hello, my profligate love. And Demo goes, ah! So I think that'd almost be a roll the dice element of the ending. Like, every now and then Demoman's got like, oh, you've got to roll for your like alcoholism or something, and whatever outcome he gets, that's the one he did while drunk. So when he gets to the end for House, it's like he's like, oh, how did I do? It's like, well, you nuked these towns over here. I kind of needed those. Like, I can imagine him getting in trouble with the NCR. I was like, oh, I'll have a quick drink at the bar at Camp McCarran, and then suddenly the entire camp hates him. And Mr. House is like, well, I did want you to defend President Kimball, but you had 8 whiskeys, and then, like, now you've got Kimball's head in your hands. There it is. How did that happen? Like, I can imagine him getting pissed up and then pissing off the boomers somehow. So he, like, alienates the boomers from the rest of the wasteland, and it's like, well, we don't have them to defend us in the final battle of Hoover Dam, but at the very least, they're too shit scared to, like, make friends with Caesar or anything, so you've done a half good, I suppose. You know what I think would be actually pretty funny would be, you know in the fort where Caesar takes all your items off you, including your alcohol? Demo's like, no, my booze. And then when Caesar's like, go destroy the bunker beneath the fort, and then he gets his alcohol back, he just starts immediately chugging it, and then he destroys the bunker underneath the fort, even though Mr. House wanted him to, like, reactivate it, and then when he gets back up, he's so pissed that he thinks the Legionnaires are still fighting him from the bunker, so he destroys both Mr. House and Caesar in one go. You know, my girlfriend gave me the suggestion that was like, you know, you don't need to marry all these characters up with a faction. Some of them can just piss off. And I like the idea that Demoman just destroys the wasteland to the point where he just legs it and is like, I'm done with, you know, because I like to imagine that a previous scenario happens. He destroys the bunker, he destroys the fort, and the NCR are like, hey buddy, you're pretty cool. Why don't you come be on our side? How about a drink? And then he ends up destroying all those guys too. And because he's just so ashamed that he's blown everything up, he just sort of like runs off and is like, I'm never going near them again. And Demoman just has this stain in his past where, do you remember a time I took down a whole nation due to booze? And that's his story he's telling in like Alcoholics Anonymous back in Shady Sands right before it gets nuked. You know what? I wish I'd made these videos before the show came out, because I've noticed every one of these backstories has got to contend with the fact that Shady Sands will eventually get nuked. That's why Scout was okay in the end. I thought the NCR's gonna come tear his little boy butthole open, but no, they get fucking nuked back into the Stone Age. So I think he'd be fine in the end. But I also like how, in my mind, the only thing he does when he gets drunk is that he just goes on a rampage. I don't know why this is a thing that my mind has just decided that he does, but it did make me laugh, so I'm glad I came up with that. I like that when he's drunk, he doesn't like say really awkward things or admit to weird truths like telling everyone he's got an under-average penis. He just sort of goes on a murder spree. So in truth, I think he would just get pissed, break everything, and have to flee the Mojave in terror. So I'm gonna say that's where I think Demoman would end up, because I think it's a lot more fun than just, hello, I'm Tavish Finnegan de Groot, the sensible politician that tries to do everything in everyone's best interest. No, that's boring. He wants to go get pissed, break everything, and then be like, you know what, I've done my piece. I'm going, peace out, guys. I'm not cleaning this up. Yes, man, go fuck yourself. You know, I'm going, bye. I'll see you in season 2 of the show or something. Member shoutouts time. Thank you to Irrational Sloth, Brandon Ferretti, Gams, Tucket Flame, Thrawn1, Johannes, Commie the Cockroach, Gamra, Toilet Egg McMuffin, Wilkins Coffee, Voxus,